The courthouse lobby fell quiet the moment my son-in-law shoved past me, sending coffee splashing across the marble floor. He jabbed a finger in my direction and barked, "Move, old man! You don't belong here." My daughter stood right beside him, eyes down, not saying a word. I bent down, picked up the crushed cup, smiled, and walked away. 10 minutes later, the bailiff called all rise. My son-in-law turned toward the bench, and the color drained from his face when he saw me sitting in judgment over his biggest trial. I want to tell you about the night I first understood what it meant to disappear, not from a room, but from my own daughter's life. It was a fall evening in Dallas, one of those rare October nights when the air actually cools down enough to remind you that autumn exists in Texas. I'd spent the whole afternoon in the kitchen pot, roast with thyme, the way my wife Evelyn used to make it every Sunday. Buttered egg noodles from scratch, an apple crisp cooling on the counter, because Claire had loved it since she was 6 years old. She'd called that morning, her voice bright, and carrying just a trace of nerves. "Dad, I want you to meet someone. Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge. I'm glad you're here with me today. If these stories speak to you, consider staying close by, subscribing, so you don't miss the ones still to come. Before we get started, I'm curious what you're up to right now. While you listen, cooking something, taking a drive, maybe just resting for a few minutes. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. A quick note. Some details in this story have been shaped for the purpose of storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. What matters is the truth underneath it. We're coming for dinner tonight. Is that okay? Of course it is, I said. Come whenever you're ready. I pulled out the good plates, the ones Evelyn had chosen the year we first moved in, and set them around the table. Folded the cloth napkins just the way she'd shown me, placed a candle in the center, which felt a little foolish for a man eating alone most nights, but I did it anyway. 64 years old, years off the bench, and here I was lighting a candle because my daughter was bringing someone home. Something in my chest loosened that I hadn't felt move in a long time. They got there at 7. Claire was radiant dark hair, pinned back a blue dress I'd never seen on her. Wearing that smile she gets where her eyes and cheeks and everything else join in at once. Next to her stood Preston Langford, tall, pushing 40 in a charcoal suit that cost more than my pension check. He walked like a man who assumed every room had been waiting for him. His gaze swept my living room, the way an appraiser sweeps a foreclosure, brisk professional, already arriving at a number. "Huh," he said, absorbing it all. "Cozy, very modest." He looked sideways at Claire. "I had no idea this was how you were raised." Claire's smile held, but something shifted behind it for just a moment. "Dad built a good life here, Preston." Sure. He kept nodding, kept scanning, never touched a thing. "It's got character." I crossed the room and put out my hand. "Gerald Harding. Glad you could come." His grip was adequate. Quick, Preston Langford. Then he was back on his phone. We gathered at the table. I brought out the food pot roast with thyme, the way my wife Evelyn used to make it every Sunday, buttered egg noodles from scratch, green beans I'd had going since 4 in Morrow. Preston studied his plate the way you study a bill you're disputing. "I don't really eat home-cooked food," he said, cutting once into the roast and then laying down his fork. "Too much salt, too much oil. Claire, why didn't you let him know we prefer restaurant food?" My daughter's cheeks flushed. "Preston, please, it's fine." He was already thumbing his phone. "I'll get something delivered. Wasn't there a Thai place you mentioned, He had food delivered to my table while I sat 3 feet away with a meal I'd started that afternoon. I kept my fork moving. I asked about his practice. Defense attorney and one of the finest in Dallas, he mentioned, though no one had inquired. I asked how he and Claire had found each other. 3 sentences. Then he pivoted to Claire to sort out a client dinner he had coming up Thursday. When the meal wound down, Preston having consumed perhaps 4 bites of his delivery order, they drifted to the living room. I began stacking dishes. His voice drifted easily through the doorway. 40 years in this place, and you never thought to upgrade it. Conversational offhand, the way you'd note a cloud. That's either contentment or stagnation. Hard to say which. My grip tightened around the edge of one of Evelyn's good plates. Claire replied something I couldn't make out from where I stood. "All I'm saying," Preston went on, "is that first impressions tell a story, and this house tells one." I ran the dishes under hot water. Slowly the rhythm Evelyn had drilled into me. Soap, rinse, rinse again. Take your time. The water does the heavy lifting. When they came to the door to leave, Claire pulled me into a long hug, chin tucked against my shoulder, the way she'd done since she was a little girl. "Dinner was wonderful, Dad. Thank you." Get home safe, I told her. At the threshold, Preston offered his hand again. Same measured grip, same economy of motion. Then his eyes went back past me, to the living room, to the sofa. The old photos. Everything Evelyn and I had accumulated in this house over the decades, and something passed through his expression, somewhere short of contempt, closer to the blankness of a man who sees something that simply doesn't register. "Good meeting you, Gerald," he said. That was the first time all night he'd used any name for me at all. Not sir, not Mr. Harding. On the way out the door, he'd landed on my first name, the way you'd say thanks to a valet. I stood in the driveway and watched their taillights shrink down the street. Back in the kitchen, I finished the washing up and covered the apple crisp in foil. Preston hadn't gone near it. I poured what was left of my coffee cold by then and sat at the table thinking about that sweep of his eyes through my living room. The particular way he delivered the word modest like he was reading from a chart. And his smile. I'd had 3 hours to observe it. Not once did it reach his eyes. Not a single time. I told myself I had him wrong. First impressions mislead. Claire was happy. What else was there to weigh? I kept telling myself that for 2 years, right up to the point when her calls stopped arriving altogether. People say distance is a matter of geography. What I discovered is that it's a matter of Sunday afternoons that go quiet. That first year after the dinner, we held a kind of routine. Claire phoned on Sundays noon most weeks. We covered the easy ground, her jewelry work, the Dallas weather, whatever was happening in the garden Evelyn had planted before she got too sick to tend it. Ordinary talk, the kind that still feels like closeness, even when it's thin. Then the second year came, and the pattern began to slip. Noon drifted to 3:00. 3 o'clock became sometime in the evening. Evening turned into nothing, a text instead. Busy today, call you soon, love you. She never did call soon. I fell back on an old bench habit when the numbers stop adding up. You start keeping track. I picked up a small notebook, the kind with a dark green cover, and logged every call date time, how long it ran a line about what we'd covered. January through June of that second year, 11 calls. Average length 6 minutes. July through December, 4 calls. Average length 3 minutes. One Sunday in October, I dialed her number and a man picked up. Hello? Smooth. No hurry behind it. Preston, I said. Is Claire available? She's busy. A beat short but placed with purpose. Being a wife and a mother. That's a full-time job. Frankly, one you'd understand better if you'd been around more when she was growing up. My jaw went tight. I raised her on my own. She can't come to the phone right now. A second pause, softer as though it were almost incidental. And Gerald, she's fine. You don't have to keep checking on her like she's still 12. He ended the call. I held the phone and didn't move for a while. My thumb sat over her name in the contacts. I had every intention of calling back. I thought about getting in the car, driving to their side of Dallas, standing at the front door until Claire came to it. Instead, I opened the notebook. Date time. Preston answered. Call ended at 2:14 p.m. The invitations were the next thing to go. For 2 years, I'd at least been included in the holidays, stiff, uncomfortable affairs where Preston dominated the conversation. And I found a corner, but I had been there. Then a Thanksgiving text arrived. We're keeping it small this year, just the 3 of us. Hope yours is good, Dad. November also held the anniversary of Evelyn's death. I went out and got white roses, the ones she'd always loved, and arranged them on the kitchen table in the spot where she used to sit with her morning coffee. I was expecting Claire at 2:00. She'd made a point of coming every year. When 4:00 came, I picked up the phone. Oh, Dad, her voice sank. I'm so sorry. Preston had a work obligation, a client dinner. I had to be there with him. I should have called you earlier. It's fine, I said. I feel awful about it. You don't need to. We'll make it up, I promise. We'll plan something soon. Soon had a way of dissolving. It always had. Her birthday that December, I made the drive across Dallas with a card and a gift, a gold locket I'd had engraved with her name, and her mother's birthday. 2 dates folded into one small thing. I pressed the bell. Preston appeared in the doorway, dress shirt, no jacket, that loose ease of a man on his own turf. Gerald. A statement, not a welcome. I just wanted to drop something off for Claire, I said, holding up the bag. Is she in? He looked at the bag the way you glance at a flyer left on your windshield. She's putting Nora to bed. Tonight isn't ideal. It'll only take a moment. I can just hand it to her. He lifted the bag from my grip. The door drew shut before I'd finished speaking. I stood on the porch for a moment. Then I turned and walked to the car. 2 weeks on, I asked Claire over the phone whether the locket had reached her. Oh yes. The hesitation was a beat too long. It's lovely, Dad, really. Are you wearing it? A pause. I'm holding it for the right moment. I let it go. I wrote it down. The call that cracked something loose came on a Tuesday afternoon without warning. Claire's name appeared on the screen at a time she never rang, and when I answered, her voice was stretched tight, the voice of someone keeping careful control, so the whole thing doesn't give way. Hey, Dad, can I ask you something? Anything? When it was just the two of us when I was growing up, were you happy, really happy? My throat went tight. I held the phone closer. Some of the happiest years of my life. Claire, why are you asking me this? No reason. Too quick. I've just had some things on my mind lately. What kinds of things? I don't know. A shaky breath came through the line, and something in my chest clenched around it. Sometimes I feel like I'm living inside someone else's life, and I can't remember when I stopped living my own. Claire, my voice dropped lower than I meant it to. Talk to me. I'm fine, Dad. And the door shut again just as cleanly as Preston had shut it in my face on that porch. I need to pick Nora up from school. I'll call you this weekend. She didn't call that weekend, but I sat at my kitchen table after we hung up and opened that dark green notebook, flipped back through 2 years of dates, durations, terse little summaries, and read through it the way I used to work through a case file hunting for the shape beneath the surface details. And there it was, plain as a verdict. This wasn't Claire pulling away on her own. Someone else was holding the rope. I closed the notebook. Looked out at the backyard, the garden Evelyn had planted the year before. She got sick, the ordinary quiet of the life we'd made in this house. Something was happening inside my daughter's home. Something she couldn't name yet, or wasn't being permitted to. I just didn't know yet how hard he'd pull, or how far he was prepared to go to keep her from finding her way back. He invited me for Christmas that year. I should have understood then that an invitation from Preston Langford always had a cost attached. The call came from Claire, not him, and she sounded almost apologetic, like she was passing along news she wasn't sure I'd welcome. Preston thought it would be nice to have you join us for the holidays, Dad. We're hosting some of his colleagues. It'll be a proper party. I'll be there, I said. I wore my good suit, the dark navy one I'd bought for Evelyn's funeral, and put on maybe 4 times since. Polished my shoes. Brought a bottle of wine, a decent Merlot from a shop downtown, and a small wrapped gift for Nora, Claire's daughter, my granddaughter, who had just turned 4 and whom I had met exactly twice. Preston and Claire's place was on the west side of Dallas, in the kind of neighborhood where every lawn looks like it has a standing weekly appointment, and every vehicle in the driveway costs more than most people's mortgages. The house glowed like a hotel at the holidays. String lights tracing the roofline, a wreath on the front door, broad enough to frame a portrait. The sort of Christmas that gets staged for a photograph rather than lived in. A server I didn't know answered the door. Inside, the party was well underway. 40 people, perhaps more, spread through a living room that could have contained my entire house. Lawyers and their wives, businessmen with thick handshakes and expansive laughs. The kind of gathering where wealth is worn the way other people wear cologne. You sense it before you see it. Preston caught sight of me from across the room. He came over with a glass of bourbon and that smooth, deployed smile of his. Gerald. He gripped my shoulder in the way that positions a man rather than greets him. Glad you could make it. Then turning to the fellow beside him, broad across the shoulders, expensive blazer. Bart, this is Claire's father. He's retired. Used to do something in law, nothing major. A small laugh punctuated it. The kind that offers the other person permission to laugh along. Bart smiled agreeably. Gerald Harding, I said, extending my hand. Good to meet you. Bart had just started to reply when Preston was already angling him away. Bart, you have to hear what Wendell settled last month. Just like that, I was standing alone in the center of a Christmas party in my daughter's home, still holding the wine nobody had relieved me of. I found a spot near the fireplace and held it, watched the room. Old reflex 40 years on the bench conditions you to read a room before you open your mouth. I'd been standing there perhaps 15 minutes when I heard her. As Grandpa, I turned. Nora came running across the hardwood floor in Christmas pajamas, green with little snowflakes on them. Arms flung wide, her whole face split open in the kind of grin that only a 4-year-old can produce without a trace of self-consciousness. She connected with my legs at full speed and nearly took us both down sideways. I caught her, steadied us both, and felt the thing that had been sitting like a stone in my chest all evening give way just slightly. Well, hello there. I managed, bending down to her height. My voice came out rougher than I'd planned. "Look at you. Did you bring me something?" she demanded without preamble. That made me laugh, a genuine one, the first of the night. "I might have." I lifted her and carried her to a chair by the window, away from the noise. She settled into my lap and talked about her preschool teacher, about a dog she'd spotted on the street that she'd privately named Biscuit, about how the Christmas tree was unquestionably the largest one in the entire world. "Grandpa," I measured it with my arms. For 20 minutes, the party ceased to exist. Just the two of us at that window, her small, warm weight in my lap, her voice filling in 2 years' worth of empty space. Then Preston appeared. "Nora," his voice came through her story about Biscuit like a blade through paper. "Come with me. Mom needs you." Nora shifted in my lap. "But I'm talking to Grandpa." "Nora." She climbed down, tossed one more grin at me over her shoulder. "Bye, Grandpa." And off she went after her father. Preston never looked at me. He placed his hand on Nora's shoulder and steered her toward the kitchen, and just before they turned the corner, he bent down and said something close to her ear. Whatever it was, she didn't look back again. I sat in the chair by the window while the party moved around me. Glasses were refilled nearby. Someone across the room erupted in laughter at a story I hadn't caught. I noticed then that the Merlot I'd brought was sitting on the counter unopened. The wrapped gift for Nora was nowhere I could find. Preston had taken it from me at the door, and after that, it had simply ceased to exist. I looked across the room at Claire. She was near the dining table, talking with one of Preston's colleagues' wives, laughing at something. She glanced up, found my eyes for just a moment, and the laugh faltered. Something moved through her expression. Not quite guilt, something closer to grief. Then Preston materialized at her elbow, said something low into her ear, and her attention snapped back to the room like a cord pulled taut and let go. I retrieved my own coat from the rack by the door. No one registered me leaving. Outside, the December air hit my face sharp and clean after the stuffed warmth of that room. I walked to my car, settled into the driver's seat, and looked at the lit house through the windshield for a moment before I drove away. On the way home, I kept thinking about what Nora was being taught about me in rooms I wasn't allowed inside, and whether Claire still remembered the man I had been before. Preston decided the shape I was permitted to take in her life. There is a specific variety of pain that comes with standing at your own daughter's door, as though you are a stranger. I know it well now, and familiarity has not made it easier. It was December 4th, years into Claire's marriage, one of those flat gray Dallas mornings that can't commit to rain or cold and delivers both. Nora was turning 5. I'd been turning her gift over in my mind for weeks. Not something expensive, nothing that would draw another remark about the wrapping. I found a craftsman out in the Bishop Arts District who carved wooden toys by hand, small painted animals with working joints, the kind a child might actually love for years, rather than discard in weeks. I had him make a small painted fox with a russet coat, jointed legs that actually moved. I tried reaching Claire 3 times that week. Monday, Wednesday morning, Thursday evening. Each time her voicemail answered, her voice bright and recorded, and not quite the one I knew. On Saturday morning, I drove across Dallas. The gift was wrapped in purple paper, Nora's favorite color. Claire had mentioned it once months before, and I'd recorded it in the notebook because that is what I had become, a man who writes down his granddaughter's favorite color because he no longer trusts himself to remember it the next time he is given the chance. The neighborhood was quiet when I pulled up. I pulled up to the gate iron, tall, the kind built to announce that whoever lives behind it has decided who's permitted in. I pressed the intercom. A pause. Then Preston's voice came through the speaker, flat and disengaged. "Who is it?" "It's Gerald," I said. "I brought something for Nora's birthday." Another pause, longer than the first. "We're not receiving visitors today." My grip tightened on the gift tucked under my arm. "It's her birthday, Preston. I'm not a visitor. I'm her grandfather. I just want to give her. She has everything she needs." His voice didn't climb, didn't tighten, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. It was the voice of a man entirely undisturbed by what he was doing. "We don't need secondhand love wrapped in discount store paper." The intercom clicked off. The gate stayed shut. I stood there on the sidewalk in front of that iron gate, holding a hand-carved wooden fox wrapped in purple paper. For a long moment, I couldn't make myself move. The cold morning pressed against my face. Down the block, someone's sprinkler system stuttered cheerfully to life, absurdly out of place with the moment. I stood there a while. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I pressed the button again. "Preston, I'm not going anywhere until you tell Claire I was here." That's all. Just tell her. Silence. The speaker crackled once and went dead. I crouched down and placed the gift on the ground in front of the gate. Straightened back up. Slowly my knees didn't thank me for the cold concrete. Then I pulled out my phone and sent Claire a text. 3 words, nothing more. I came today. She didn't reply, but I needed her to know I was still trying. That was the difference between this time and every time before. I wasn't simply leaving, I was leaving evidence. I walked back to my car. I don't recall the drive home. I remember sitting in my own driveway for a while. Once I got there, hands resting in my lap, looking at the peach tree through the windshield. Evelyn had put that tree in the spring before she got sick. It still produced fruit every summer, stubbornly beautifully, as though she'd left detailed instructions and expected them to be honored. Inside, I put the kettle on and sat at the kitchen table. My phone showed nothing. No missed calls, no message from Claire saying she'd heard. No, Dad, I'm sorry. Not even, did you come by? Which left 2 possibilities Preston hadn't told her, or he had, and she hadn't reached out. Either way, the silence carried more information than words would have. I opened the dark green notebook on the table and turned to a fresh page. Wrote the date, drove to the house. Gate closed. Gift left outside. Then I set the pen down and looked at what I'd put there. Such a small entry for something that heavy. My eyes burned, not quite tears more. The pressure that builds behind them when you've been suppressing them so long, your body loses the knack of letting them go. I pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose and breathed through it. Slowly, deliberately. Evelyn used to tell me I dealt with things the way I'd write a legal opinion. You don't feel first, Gerald. You analyze, you file, you cross-reference. She said it with love, mostly, and occasional exasperation. She wasn't wrong. So I did what I always did. I analyzed. Claire had not called. That was a data point. Claire had been calling less and less for 2 years. That was a pattern. Her voice on the phone had grown quieter, more guarded, more rehearsed. The voice of someone speaking with another person standing just behind their shoulder. That was evidence. And that remark of Preston's, she has everything she needs, delivered not with cruelty, but with the flat, unchallenged authority of a man stating the temperature outside. That wasn't protectiveness. That was ownership. I picked the pen back up. Below the gate entry, I wrote 4 words. She didn't choose this. I read them 3 times. Then I added 4 more. This was chosen for her. I closed the notebook, poured my tea, and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at Evelyn's peach tree bare in December, now just branches reaching against gray sky. Something was happening inside that house across Dallas. Something Claire couldn't name yet, or wasn't being allowed to. For 2 years, I'd been telling myself she was an adult, making her own choices, that the space between us was natural, that she needed room to build her own life. Standing at that window, I stopped telling myself those things. My daughter wasn't drifting. She was being held. What I didn't yet know was that the same night I sat at that table writing in the notebook, something was unfolding inside that house, something Claire would carry in silence for a very long time. I drove out there one afternoon without calling ahead. I told myself it was impulse, that I'd simply been in that part of Dallas and thought I'd stop by. The truth was, I'd been sitting inside my house for 3 days since writing those 4 words, and the walls had begun to press in. It was a Thursday in late spring, already warm the way Dallas gets in April air, thick with cut grass and honeysuckle. I parked 2 houses down, not by design, just the first open spot, and walked the sidewalk toward Claire and Preston's house, with no real plan beyond seeing my daughter's face. I heard them before I was close enough to knock. The side window of the living room was cracked open a few inches, the way you do when the air conditioning runs cold, but the outside air is still tolerable. I was moving along the side of the house, about to come around to the front door, when Preston's voice slipped through that gap like a blade through silk. If you see your father one more time without telling me first. Low measured the voice of a man who had learned long ago that real control doesn't need volume. I will call my lawyer by morning. Do you understand me? I stopped walking. My hand was still extended slightly toward the front of the house, frozen in mid-reach. Claire's voice came back trembling at the edges. Preston, he's my father. He's Nora's grandfather. You can't just, pause. Footsteps on hardwood. Do you think a family court judge is going to award Nora to a broke, unemployed woman whose father is some bitter old man who can't let go? Go ahead, Claire. Try me. I'm not unemployed. I substitute teach. You make $14 an hour when someone calls in sick. His voice dropped further, which made it worse somehow. Without me, nothing you have holds up in a courtroom. So the next time you feel like running to your father, ask yourself whether Nora is worth it. Claire's voice broke on the next word, just slightly, just enough. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. A door opened somewhere deeper in the house. Dinner's at 7. Don't be late. His footsteps receded. A moment later, I heard Claire one sharp, quickly swallowed sound, the kind your body produces when you're fighting hard, not to cry, and lose for exactly 1 second. My legs had gone somewhere between numb and unsteady. I was standing with my back flat against the exterior wall of my daughter's house, and 4 years of pieces rearranged themselves in my chest like furniture being wrenched into new positions. She hadn't been pulling away from me. She'd been protecting Nora. Every call, every unanswered door, every carefully measured conversation where she said, "I'm fine," in the voice that meant anything but. She hadn't been choosing Preston over me. She'd been calculating every single day what it would cost Nora if she didn't. I pressed my fist against my mouth and breathed through my nose. My eyes burned, not the dry pressure from before, but something hotter, something that wanted out and couldn't be allowed. I didn't knock. I couldn't knock. If I walked through that door now, Preston would have exactly what he needed, proof that Claire had made contact, without his knowledge ammunition, for whatever attorney he had ready. I would make things worse by trying to help. So I walked back to my car. Each step felt deliberate, like moving through something denser than air. I got in, stared at the steering wheel. The house was quiet from out here, ordinary looking, nice neighborhood, good landscaping, the kind of place that photographs well and tells lies beautifully. I drove home. That night I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I went to the second bedroom, the one I'd turned into a small home office after leaving the bench, and pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk. Underneath a stack of old case files and a retirement plaque I'd never gotten around to hanging was a business card. An old colleague from my years on the bench, family law attorney, one of the finest in Dallas County. I picked up the phone. "Irving," I said when he answered. "It's Gerald Harding. I need to ask you something, hypothetically." "Gerald." Genuine warmth in his voice. "It's been years. What's going on?" "If a woman wanted out of a marriage," I said carefully, "but her husband held every account, every asset, controlled all of it, and was threatening to weaponize a custody fight, what would her options look like?" Irving went quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that's thinking, not stalling. "Hypothetically," he said, "she'd need documentation, evidence of financial control, any recorded threats if she has them, and she'd need someone to cover the legal costs up front, because if he holds the money, she can't fight without outside help. And if she won't accept that help," I asked, "if she's too frightened to—" Another pause. "Then she has to get to the point where staying scares her more than leaving does." He paused again. "Gerald, is this actually hypothetical?" My jaw tightened. "I'll call you again when it isn't," I said. "Thank you, Irving." I hung up and sat in the dark office with the business card in my hand. One call, but the answer it gave me was clear enough. This wasn't a problem a phone call could solve, or even a good attorney. Not yet. While I was trying to work out how to reach my daughter, the man I needed to reach her from was busy taking on the largest and most compromised case of his career. I found out the way I found out most things that year over coffee, alone the morning paper, open across my kitchen table. It was a Tuesday in May, roughly 3 weeks after I'd stood outside that side window and heard Preston's voice do things I hadn't been able to put down since. I'd been sleeping badly, the broken kind, where you surface at 3 a.m. in the morning, with your pulse already running and no memory of what you were dreaming. I'd gotten up early, brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and opened the Dallas Morning News. The story sat on the front page below the fold. Prominent defense attorney takes Whitley DUI case. I read the name twice. Preston Langford. Beneath it, the details. Conrad Whitley, 52 years old, CEO of Whitley Energy Solutions, one of Dallas's mid-size oil services firms. 3 weeks earlier, on a Friday night, Whitley had climbed behind the wheel of his Escalade after a client dinner at a downtown steakhouse. His blood alcohol level, when finally tested, was 17, more than twice the legal limit under Texas law. He'd blown through a red light on Lemon Avenue at roughly 61 and struck a sedan driven by a 34-year-old man named Kevin Dillard. Kevin Dillard died at the scene. His 6-year-old daughter, who had been buckled in the back seat, was airlifted to Children's Medical Center Dallas with a fractured pelvis and a collapsed lung. I set my coffee cup down. Read that paragraph again, then once more. A 6-year-old girl, a fractured pelvis, a collapsed lung. Her father dead on Lemon Avenue on a Friday night because a man with a 17 blood alcohol level decided he was fit to drive. Under Texas Penal Code, Section 4908, intoxication manslaughter, Whitley was facing a second-degree felony. That meant 2 to 20 years in state prison, plus fines, plus civil liability that could climb into the tens of millions. The law in Texas takes intoxication manslaughter seriously. From what I could read between the lines of the article, the evidence was substantial, and Preston Langford had just announced he was taking the defense. I turned to page 3 where the story picked up. There was a photograph of Preston, the professional headshot, from his firm's website, All Confidence and Expensive Teeth. And beside it, a smaller photo, Renee Dillard, 32 years old, Kevin Dillard's wife, their daughter's age listed as 6 in the caption. Renee Dillard had been photographed outside the Dallas County Courthouse. She was holding a framed picture of her husband pressed against her chest, looking directly into the camera with the kind of expression that doesn't perform grief. It simply is grief stripped of any effort to manage how it reads to other people. Her eyes were raw. Her jaw was set. She looked like a woman who had wept until the well ran dry and was now moving on something harder and colder entirely. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called a man named Clifton Prudhomme, a retired investigator I'd known since my early years on the bench. The sort of man who'd spent 30 years watching Dallas's legal world from the inside and knew where every body was buried, metaphorically speaking. "Clifton," I said, "you see the morning news today? The Whitley case?" His voice was dry. "Yeah, I saw it. Tell me what you know." A pause, the pause of a man deciding how much to give. "Gerald, what Preston Langford knows about Conrad Whitley and what he's planning to argue in court are two very different things." "That's what I figured," I said. "How different?" But Whitley called Langford from the scene. Clifton's voice dropped, even though we were both alone. Within 10 minutes of the accident, before the paramedics had even stabilized the girl. Whatever passed between them in that call, Langford showed up at the scene before the police had finished processing it. Make of that what you will. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles ached. And the dash cam footage Whitley's vehicle would have had a system. "That's the interesting part," Clifton said. "Whitley's people are claiming the system malfunctioned, data corrupted, nothing recoverable. A beat. Convenient timing on that malfunction." I got up from the kitchen table and walked to the window. Outside, Dallas carried on with its morning cars moving sprinklers, ticking a neighbor, walking a golden retriever along the sidewalk. The ordinary machinery of a city going about its business, unaware of what was happening in its courtrooms. $2 million in legal fees, Clifton added. "That's the number I'm hearing. Whitley is paying Langford $2 million to make a .17 blood alcohol level and a dead man on Lemon Avenue go away." "He can't make it go away," I said. "No," Clifton agreed. "But he can make it complicated. He can drag it out. He can put Renee Dillard through 18 months of depositions while her 6-year-old daughter heals from a fractured pelvis. He can plant doubt in the jury's mind, and doubt is all he needs." I pressed 2 fingers to my forehead, the slow-building kind of headache that comes not from pain, but from fury held under tight control. "And the girl's testimony?" I asked. "The daughter." "She was 6, Clifton said quietly. "She was in the back seat. Whatever she witnessed, whatever she remembers, Preston Langford will find a way to frame it as the recollection of a traumatized child, unreliable, suggestible." Another pause. "He's good at this, Gerald. That's why Whitley hired him." I looked back at the newspaper lying open on the table, at Renee Dillard's photograph, the set of her jaw, the red rims around her eyes, the way she clutched her husband's picture like it was the last solid object in a world that had turned to water. "Thank you, Clifton," I said. "Gerald." His voice shifted the careful register old friends use when they're about to say something they know you won't want to hear. "Whatever you're thinking about, be careful." "I'm always careful," I said. "You're a retired judge whose son-in-law just took a case that'll be in every paper in Dallas for the next year," he said. "That's not careful, that's complicated." I folded the newspaper and set it to one side. "I'll be in touch, Clifton." I hung up and stood at the kitchen window for a long moment, looking out at Evelyn's peach tree full of green leaves, now in May, bare of fruit, stubbornly alive. $2 million. That was what Preston Langford thought a man's life was worth the price of making certain the law failed to do what it was built to do. But money wasn't the only thing Preston was concealing, and the camera that had recorded everything on Lemon Avenue that night, he already knew precisely where it was. In 40 years on the bench, I learned one thing about guilty men with expensive lawyers. They don't hide the truth by destroying it. Procedure is the weapon. Paperwork is the fog. Layer enough of both on top of the truth, and the people trying to reach it collapse from sheer exhaustion long before they get there. Preston Langford had absorbed that principle down to the bone. Clifton reached me 4 days after we first spoke. I was out back wrestling with the garden hose, doing something that required zero thought. That's the point of those tasks. Your mind is grinding away on its own, so you give your hands something harmless to occupy them. Got more on the camera, he said, no greeting. You won't be happy. Go ahead. Turns out the dash cam in Whitley's Escalade wasn't simply glitching out. Clifton was picking every word with surgical care. Whitley phoned Langford right there at the scene. I told you that much. What I held back is what a contact of mine in the department caught wind of 2 days later in a parking structure. Langford showed up alongside Whitley's assistant to go through the vehicle. My fingers clenched around the hose. Water ran uselessly into the dirt. Still, the assistant was told to put the vehicle through a technical inspection, all standard and legitimate on its face. The catch was buried in the detail, hold the data extraction request from the investigators on ice until Langford personally cleared it. Clifton let that land. Texas law gives an attorney, once he's formally entered representation, a channel that evidence requests have to pass through. Langford parked himself in that channel. He turned the representation process into a stalling tool. I set it flat. The hose water had puddled now and was spreading brown at my feet. I switched it off. Long enough, Clifton said, that anything stored on that system became nearly impossible to verify after the fact. Chain of custody problems, timestamp disputes, exactly the kind of ammunition a defense lawyer uses to argue the data was tainted. I lowered myself onto the porch steps. Late afternoon sun caught the peach tree sideways, pulling long shadows all the way across the yard. Under Texas law penal code, Section 3709, specifically interfering with physical evidence in an active criminal investigation, is a third-degree felony. It steps up to a second-degree felony when the investigation centers on a death. What Clifton was laying out stopped just short of that threshold, and it stopped there on purpose because Preston never crossed a line when bending it past. Recognition was available to him. He'd warp them until they looked like something else entirely, then stand back and say, perfectly straight, see, there's more, Clifton said. Did you catch this morning's Dallas Morning News? I had not. I went in, opened the paper on my laptop. The headline landed like a fist. Dillard family accident questions raised about victim's history. I went through it quickly the first time, then read it again word by word. When I put the laptop aside and pressed both palms to the kitchen table, it was because my hands had begun to tremble. The piece leaned on unnamed sources to suggest Kevin Dillard, the man who lost his life on Lemon Avenue, carried a pattern of dangerous driving. Careful language, nothing provable but printed and published under the byline of a freelance contributor, nobody at the Dallas Morning News appeared to recognize. Clifton, I said. My voice was deliberate and flat. The register I fall into when something is trying to get through and I won't let it. Who wrote it? Freelancer name of Davis Clifton said. But I ran the sources. 2 of them point straight back to a private investigation outfit based out of uptown Dallas. Small shop, defense work mostly. Preston had commissioned a smear campaign against a dead man. Can't put that in front of a jury, Clifton said, measuring each word. But I can tell you, Kevin Dillard had exactly 1 speeding citation across 11 years behind the wheel. 1. A 42 and a 35, 2018 just outside Katy. That's the whole record. The familiar heat built behind my eyes. Insistent, dull, relentless. I pictured Renee Dillard reading that headline somewhere across Dallas, sitting at her kitchen table. Her 6-year-old daughter in a hospital bed, absorbing a story that had repositioned her dead husband as the one responsible. And people are taking it in, I said. Some are, Clifton said. His voice had gone flat with fatigue. Online comments, speculation that Dillard was probably speeding too, that Whitley may not have been alone in driving badly. You know how the mechanism works. Plant the doubt and it propagates without any further help. Preston doesn't have to make people believe his version. He only needs them unsure enough about the truth. I pushed back from the table, crossed to the window, and stood there. The street outside looked ordinary, peaceful. A kid was pedaling a bicycle along the sidewalk without a care in the world, with no idea that 30 minutes across the city, one man was methodically taking a grieving family apart at a rate of $2 million for the service. "Clifton," I said. "Thank you for all of it." He paused. "Gerald. I know that expression of yours. 30 years across various courtrooms I've seen it. Whatever it is you're thinking of doing, I'm not thinking of doing anything I said. I'm only thinking. That's precisely what concerns me," he said. Then the line was dead. I didn't move from that window for a good while. The peach tree, the still street, the mundane afternoon light draped over the neighborhood like a cloth that had no knowledge of what lay beneath. I pulled open the bottom desk drawer and stared at the battered file folder in the back. My name on it. Honor Gerald Harding, Dallas County District Court. I left it where it was. Not yet. But something had shifted in me that night. For the first time in 3 years, I was not simply a retired man in an empty house growing quieter by the year. Something was gathering on the horizon, and I understood I would have to choose where I stood when it arrived. I was not present that night. I need to say that plainly. Everything I came to know about what happened inside that house 2 weeks before the trial arrived in fragments slowly from the single witness who gave me the truth. Not because anyone compelled her, but because she simply did. Nora was 7 years old before she found the words. We were on my back porch a Saturday eating apple crisp, and she said it in the particular way children say the hard things. No theatrics, no build-up. Just a statement offered the way you might note that it rained last Tuesday. "Mommy was crying that night," she said. "The night before Daddy stopped coming home. Everything in my chest went still." "Which night, sweetheart?" "The one when she found the thing on the computer." She dragged her fork across the apple crisp. No eating, just dragging. She needed to use Daddy's laptop because hers was on the charger, and she had something to print for school. Then she went quiet. And then she started crying. And then he came home. She left it there. I held my coffee mug and waited, not shifting, barely breathing. He got really loud. She said, her voice small. Daddy was really loud that night. And that is how I know what I know. Not from being in that room, but from a 7-year-old on my back porch delivering it piece by piece in the measured, incomplete language children use when they've seen something that was never meant for them. What Claire had found on that laptop was an email thread. Preston's account had been left open, the kind of oversight that overtakes a man who has practiced caution so long he forgets it still applies to him. The thread ran between Preston and a private investigator, the same uptown Dallas firm Clifton had already connected to his operation. The directions inside it were plain and left no room for interpretation. Make the dead man the problem. Driving history, money, anything personal, whatever it takes. Below that, the investigator's reply record is clean. Single minor speeding ticket. Below that, Preston's answer. Then we build context around it. People accept what appears in print, make it hold together. Claire had run those pages off the printer. According to Nora, her mother was at the kitchen table with them spread out in front of her when Preston walked through the door. She asked him what it was Nora told me. She set her fork down. Her face was carrying something it wasn't built to carry, the look of a child who has picked up a weight meant for someone twice her age. "Preston, what is this?" That's what she said, and she was already in tears. Her voice kept breaking. I breathed in through my nose and out slowly. "What did Daddy say?" I kept my voice smooth level. He got really mad. Nora lifted her fork, then set it back down. He told her she had no business going through his things. He said she had no grasp of how the law functioned. He said she slowed, pressing back into the memory. She didn't hand me a transcript. She handed me the outline, the contour of it. The thing children hold on to when they've revisited something, so often it loses its jagged edges, but never loses its weight. He said something about Mommy being nothing, if it weren't for him, Nora said, quiet and deliberate. And Mommy told him she knew what he'd done to that man's family. Daddy said that family had nothing to do with us. She paused. Then he said something about keeping our family whole. His voice went very quiet when he said it. That was what scared me most. "It's all right," I told her gently. "You don't have to say any more." He hit her, Nora said. No drama, no hesitation. The flatness of a child who has revisited the moment so many times it has gone smooth. He hit Mommy, and I was standing at the top of the stairs. What I was about to learn about what had really been happening behind closed doors would change how I understood everything that came before it. Before I tell you what came next, let me ask you this: if someone you loved had been quietly suffering and hiding it to protect you, would you want to know the truth, or would a part of you wish you hadn't asked? I noticed it first in my hands, the coffee mug. I set it down on the porch railing with deliberate care because my grip had gone unsteady and I didn't trust what I might do with it. 7 years old on the staircase watching her father strike her mother. That image settled into my chest the way heavy things settle with weight and corners. The kind of thing that takes up permanent residence once it arrives. Nora, I said. My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. I cleared my throat. After that night, did your mom seem all right? She didn't cry anymore, Nora said. Not so I could see. But her eyes were swollen every morning, and she held me for a really long time before school. She looked up at me, those clear, serious eyes that were so much like Claire's at that same age that something in my chest seized up. Grandpa was Daddy, a bad man. I looked at my granddaughter for a long moment, at the apple crisp cooling between us, at the afternoon shadow the peach tree threw across the porch boards. Your daddy made some very bad choices, I said, choosing each word. That's not the same thing as being a bad man. But when the choices cause harm to people you love, the distinction stops offering much comfort. She absorbed that with the particular gravity children bring, 2 answers meant for adults. Then she lifted her fork and went back to eating. I turned my gaze out toward the yard. My hands had steadied, but something deeper had gone very, very quiet inside me. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet of certainty of looking directly at something and no longer turning away from it. Claire had phoned me early the following morning, her voice thin and measured like she was transporting it carefully, so nothing would spill. "Dad," she said, "I miss you." She didn't say a word about the night before. She didn't need to. I pieced it together. Later she had sat with those printed pages for 2 weeks. No money of her own to go to the police with confidence. No attorney she could afford to retain. And a terror that moving too early would cost her Nora. Fear like that doesn't leave you motionless. It makes you deliberate. She was waiting for the right opening. Something in those 3 words, the way she said, "Dad," as though it were the first firm ground she'd found in a very long time, told me everything. The words themselves left out. She didn't tell me what had happened, but her voice made clear that the walls Preston had constructed around her were beginning to give way, and that whatever came next, only she could be the one to walk through them. Every instinct I had said, "Get up, get in the car, drive to her." I understand how that sounds. I understand that any father who hears those 3 words spoken in that particular shattered glass register would have been moving toward the door before the call even ended. I wanted to be. Every part of me was aimed at that door, but 40 years on the bench had driven one lesson deeper than the rest. Wanting to act and knowing when to act are not the same thing. Sometimes the most powerful move available to you is staying exactly where you are. I sat at my kitchen table a long time after Claire's call ended. Morning light came through the window, at a low angle, catching the dust hanging in the air, making everything look like it was moving through something thicker than time. I brewed fresh coffee and didn't touch it. The dark green notebook sat on the table, and I left it closed. I thought through what would happen if I pulled into that driveway right now. Preston would see the car. He'd come to the door, and his face would do what it always does, that flat arranged blankness, and he'd say something smooth and definitive. And Claire would be standing somewhere behind him, and I would watch the calculation move across her eyes in real time. If I let Dad in, it costs Nora. If I let Dad in, it costs Nora. And she would close the door gently, apologetically, but she would close it because that is what 5 years of slow, methodical erosion looks like from inside it. You don't simply walk out because someone who loves you appears on the step. You've been told too many times that the person at the door is the danger. So I stayed. I picked up the phone, but not to call Claire. I called Irving Crane, the family law attorney I'd spoken with months earlier about Claire's options, framed then as a hypothetical. "Irving," I said, "I need to revisit that conversation." "I figured you'd call eventually," he said. What shifted? She reached out to me. I kept my voice even. Nothing direct. "But she's reaching." Irving said, "Gerald, I want to be straight with you. A woman in her position, no financial independence, a husband leveraging custody as a threat. The moment she begins to show cracks is also the moment she's most exposed. If she moves before she has something solid under her, he'll turn it against her." "I know," I said. "That's precisely why I'm calling you instead of driving to her house." "Smart," he said. Here's what I can do. I'll have a full protective strategy built out, financial documentation, emergency custody protocols, a motion for a protective order if it reaches that point. Everything staged so that when she's ready, when she decides we can be in motion within 24 hours. Do it, I said, whatever the cost. Gerald. A pause. She has to be the one to make that call. You understand that? I understand. I said it quietly. I just need to make certain that when she does, the door opens fast. I set the phone down and leaned back. The coffee was cold. Outside, a mockingbird was performing in the peach tree, borrowing its way through half a dozen other birds' songs, never quite finding one to call its own. My phone rang 40 minutes later, a number I didn't place at first. Then recognition came. Dallas County Court Administration, Gerald. The voice was warm and instantly familiar, even across 3 years. Beverly Tatum, senior clerk of Dallas County District Court. The woman who had managed my calendar, kept my case files in order, and run my chambers with an efficiency so quiet and total that the building itself seemed to orient around her. I don't know if you've been tracking the Whitley case assignment. I've been tracking it, I said carefully. Then you may already know what I'm about to say. A pause. And in that pause I heard something I hadn't braced for. Not hesitation, restraint, like she was holding her professional composure in place and having to work at it. The case has been assigned Gerald. To you. The mockingbird outside went through 3 more songs. The Chief Justice used the senior judge recall provision, Beverly continued. Texas Government Code, Section 74-61. When the regular docket is under strain, the court can bring back a retired judge on a temporary basis for a specific assignment. Your name was put forward. He signed the recall order this morning. Beverly. I said, does Preston Langford know who's been assigned? The assignment posted to the court docket 30 minutes ago, she said. Public record. So, not yet. But he will. I rose from the kitchen table and walked to the window. The peach tree, the mockingbird still cycling through its borrowed repertoire. Beverly, I said, is my robe still at the courthouse? A beat. And then I heard it in her voice, something that sounded like relief that had been waiting a very long time for permission to surface. I kept it pressed, she said. Every month. I'm not sure why. It just seemed right. My throat went tight. 3 years. She had kept that robe pressed every month for 3 years. I'll be there. Thursday morning, I said. I'll have courtroom 7 ready, she said. Then quieter. It's good to have you back, Gerald. I set the phone on the kitchen table, looked toward the second bedroom, the drawer at the back, the worn file folder inside it, the one that read, Honored Sir Gerald Harding, Dallas County District Court. Then I checked the clock and ran the numbers. Preston Langford would see that docket posting within the hour. He had not the first idea what was waiting for him. I hadn't walked through those courthouse doors as a judge in 3 years. The building was unchanged. The granite front, the broad steps, the Texas flag, snapping in the October wind above the entrance. Everything precisely where I had left it. I was the one who was different. Or perhaps I had finally stopped performing a smaller version of myself. Thursday mornings, 2 days before trial, I arrived at 7:15 early enough to beat the building's population and went in through the side entrance, the one that feeds directly into the judicial wing, the one that defendants and counsel and the public never use. My old badge cleared the reader on the first pass. More than anything else that morning, that small fact loosened something in my chest. Beverly was waiting in the hallway outside my old chambers. She was 61 now, silver-haired in one of the dark blazers I had seen her wear to every occasion that called for steadiness across 2 decades, sentencing hearings, retirement ceremonies, the week we lost a young clerk in a car accident, and the whole floor went silent for days. She regarded me the way you look at something you've anticipated long enough that when it finally appears, the moment feels almost quiet. You look good, she said. I look old, I said. You look like a judge, she said, which was a different thing entirely. She turned and pushed open the chamber door. Come in, there's something I want you to see. The chamber smelled exactly as I remembered. Old paper wood polish, the faint metallic edge that came off the air conditioning vents. The specific smell of a room where consequential things get decided, laid down by decades of repetition. My old desk. The bookshelves still carrying the case reporters I'd shelved there myself. The window that looked out over the courthouse parking structure, the same view I'd stared at through 20 years of deliberation. And there, on the coat stand in the corner, hanging as though I'd stepped out for lunch and not 3 years, my robe. I walked to it and ran a hand across the fabric. Smooth, freshly pressed, the folds crisp and exact. 3 years in a courthouse closet, and it was in finer condition than most of what I had been wearing at home. Every month, Beverly said from the doorway. First Monday, I take it out, look it over, press it when it needs, hang it back. She paused. Don't ask me to explain it. I just knew the day would come. Something clenched in my jaw against a feeling I didn't want to give space to. I breathed through it. Thank you, Beverly, I said, steadier than I had any right to sound. Don't thank me yet, she said. You still have to clear the ethics committee. We convened with the Dallas County Judicial Ethics Committee at 9:00. 3 senior judges, an administrative counsel, and a court reporter to make the record official. I took my seat and laid it out before anyone put a question to me. There's a conflict I need to disclose. The defense attorney in the Whitley case, Preston Langford, is married to my daughter. For the better part of 2 years, I've had no meaningful contact with either party. I hold no financial stake in the outcome. The conflict is personal and relational, nothing more. Judge Bernadette Colvin, who had more years on the bench than anyone else in that room, leaned forward over her reading glasses. Most judges in your position would step aside without a second thought. Gerald, most judges in my position, I said carefully, haven't spent 3 years watching Preston Langford work. I'm not recusing myself because recusal is precisely what he would want, and because the law doesn't demand it when the conflict is this attenuated under the Texas Code of Judicial Conduct. Canon 3B. A judge must disqualify himself when personal bias or financial interest is present. A son-in-law serving as opposing counsel with no financial entanglement and no direct contact between the parties falls into territory. The rules handle through disclosure rather than automatic removal. I knew the rule. I had applied it from the bench more times than I could count. You'll disclose fully at trial's opening, said Judge Wendell Spear, the youngest of the 3. On the record, with both parties given a clear opportunity to raise an objection. Agreed, I said. If either side objects, I step down immediately. No argument, no appeal. They deliberated for 20 minutes. I waited in the corridor with Beverly, who put a cup of coffee in my hand that I actually finished. Are you nervous? She asked. No, I said. Then yes, but not about the committee, about Claire, about what she's going to see when she walks into that courtroom. She doesn't know, I said. She'll find out the same moment Preston does. Beverly looked at me for a moment. She's going to be all right, Gerald. I know, I said. I just need to get through the next 48 hours first. The committee came back, approved the disclosure, set the conditions. I signed the documentation, shook 3 hands, and returned to chambers with Beverly. She helped me into the robe, smoothed the shoulders, settled the collar, the same motion she'd performed 1,000 times before. I stood at the small mirror on the chamber wall and looked at what was there. 70 years old. Gray hair. The lines in my face that hadn't existed the last time I'd worn this. And underneath all of it, the same eyes. The eyes that had looked down from this bench through 2,000 cases and tried every single time to see past the noise to what was actually true. Same robe, I said. Same man, different war, Beverly said quietly. I turned from the mirror. Preston Langford had spent 6 years deciding what I was permitted to be. In 48 hours, he was going to discover he'd been wrong about that, the same way he'd been wrong about everything else. I arrived at the courthouse at 6:45 that morning. Old habit, 20 years of early mornings at Dallas County, always claiming that first quiet hour before the building woke up, and the day began pulling in every direction at once. But I didn't go in through the judicial entrance. Not yet. I had picked my clothes the night before with care. The old tan overcoat, the one with the worn right collar, I'd been meaning to replace for 2 years. Gray trousers that had surrendered their crease somewhere around 2020. Shoes that were clean but unshined. The whole picture said exactly what I needed it to say. Retired, unremarkable, nobody worth a second glance. I wanted Preston to see this version of me one last time. I wanted that familiar contempt to settle into his chest like it belonged there. Wanted him at ease, wanted him loose, wanted him climbing those courthouse steps, with the particular confidence of a man who believes he already knows how the story ends. I got coffee from the cart outside, black no cream, the same way I'd been drinking it since law school, and found a position near the main steps where the morning foot traffic flowed around me like water past a stone. The October sun was just clearing the buildings to the east, throwing long gold light across the granite and setting the Texas flag snapping overhead into sharp relief. I was on my second sip when the town car arrived. Preston stepped out first. Charcoal suit, the kind that costs enough to hold its shape regardless of how its owner moves. Oxblood Oxford shoes that caught the morning light in a way that indicated recent professional attention. Behind him came two assistants, both young, both carrying the faintly pressurized look of people who work for someone who does not tolerate error. He spotted me at once. I watched it cross his face, that small, rapid recalculation, the micro-expression of a man who has just registered something he considers beneath his notice. His chin lifted slightly. His stride didn't break. He angled toward me. "What are you doing here?" he said, not troubling to keep his voice down. His two assistants spread slightly behind him, and I registered the others on the steps. 3 lawyers in a conversation near the entrance. A court clerk descending with a stack of folders. 2 reporters standing outside the glass doors, notebooks open, all of them within easy earshot. "Morning coffee," I said. I raised the cup mild and unhurried. "Does Claire know you're here?" He said it the way you'd note a scheduling problem someone else should have handled, because if she sent you, "Claire doesn't know I'm here," I said. He regarded me the way you look at furniture left in an inconvenient spot. Then something shifted the decision to perform, to make a point for the audience on the steps. His shoulder came around and caught mine, sharp, deliberate. The coffee went first, hot liquid lifting through the October air, landing across my coat in a broad, dark stain. The cup struck the granite and split. "Careful, old man." His voice carried easily. "This isn't a park bench. Some of us have actual work to do." Someone on the steps laughed, quick, uncertain, the laugh of a person unsure whether laughter is the right response. Preston glanced down at the stains spreading through my coat. Something moved through his eyes that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite regret. It occupied the space between them, uglier than either. "Sorry about that," he said in a tone that carried the opposite meaning. "Maybe next time don't stand in the middle of a courthouse entrance looking lost." He glanced at one of his assistants. "Someone get him a napkin or something." Neither assistant moved. Preston straightened his cuff and took one more look at me. The tan overcoat, the gray trousers, the coffee soaking through the fabric with the comprehensive dismissal of a man, appraising something he has already decided is permanently beneath him. "You know what your problem is, Gerald." He used my first name the way he always had, like a verdict being delivered. "You've spent your whole life walking into rooms where people like you don't belong, believing that showing up is the same thing as mattering." He adjusted his jacket lapel and turned away. "Go home. Today isn't the day for whatever this is." He went up the steps with his assistants already speaking something about depositions, timing the case that was going to define his career. The conversations around me resumed. The reporters returned to their notebooks. The lawyers pushed through the glass door. I stood on those steps with coffee soaking through my coat and watched Preston Langford's back as he disappeared into the building, where in roughly 90 minutes I would be looking down at him from 10 feet above the floor. I set the cracked cup on the lip of the nearest concrete planter. "I hope you're still smiling in about 10 minutes, son," said quietly. Not for him, just enough. He didn't turn around. His conversation, if anything, grew slightly louder as the door swallowed him. I let the steps clear. Then I moved left past the main entrance, past the press area, to the unmarked side door that feeds into the judicial wing, the one that defendants and attorneys and members of the public walk by every day without registering that it's there. My badge found the reader. The lock gave. 10 minutes later, Preston Langford walked into courtroom 7, and I was already seated at the bench waiting. A courtroom carries a particular kind of silence before proceedings begin. Not the silence of an empty room, the silence of held breath. 50 people occupying the same space, every one of them aimed at the same moment, generating a collective tension that hums just beneath the threshold of hearing. I had sat inside that silence from both sides. That morning, for the first time in 3 years, I was in the right one. Beverly had the room running with precision. Counsel tables set, court reporter in position, the gallery filling at a steady pace with the particular mix that serious cases draw, journalists with notebooks, law students wearing the eager look of people convinced they are about to witness something instructive. And in the front row of the public gallery, in a dark blue blouse with her hands folded carefully in her lap, Renee Dillard, 32 years old, Kevin Dillard's widow. She had arrived before anyone else, 40 minutes early. Beverly told me afterward, sitting out in the corridor until the doors opened, holding a small photograph she tucked into her purse when she came in. I took her in for a moment from my position just outside the chamber door, the set of her shoulders, the deliberate stillness of someone who had decided before ever walking through those doors, exactly how much of herself she was prepared to spend today. Then I pushed through and crossed to the bench. What moved through the room wasn't quite a sound. It was the cancellation of sound, every conversation, every rustled page, every small ambient noise of a room in motion, all of it cutting off at once the way a record goes silent when the needle lifts. Beverly's voice, all rise, the Honorable Gerald Harding presiding. Chairs scraped, people stood. Preston was at the defense table, left side 6 feet from the bench. Legal pad in front of him, pen in hand, saying something to the young man beside him. Wire-rimmed glasses, navy suit. The same assistant I'd observed on the steps with the unhurried ease of a man who anticipated the next several hours unfolding exactly as designed. The assistant looked up first. I watched the color drain from his face, not a gradual fade, but a sudden subtraction, as though something had pulled the blood straight down out of him. He reached across and put a hand on Preston's arm. Preston kept talking, waved him off with 2 fingers, the gesture of a man accustomed to being interrupted at inconvenient moments. The assistant gripped harder. Preston's pen went still. His jaw tightened the way a jaw does when a train of thought gets derailed. He turned to look at the young man, caught what was on his face, and then lifted his eyes slowly to the bench, to the robe, to the nameplate in front of me. Hon Gerald Harding. 2 seconds, 3, 4. The pen slipped from his fingers and struck the table with a small, flat sound that filled the room far beyond its size. His chair went back, not tipped, not knocked, but shoved the motion of a man whose legs moved before his, thinking caught up. The legal pad slid off the table edge. Papers followed, deposition excerpts, exhibit lists, the precisely assembled architecture of 6 months of case preparation, spreading across the courtroom floor in a slow, unhurried cascade. Preston stood. His mouth was open, not shaping words. Just open the way a door swings wide when the latch has failed. I did not move. Hands folded on the bench surface, back straight expression, unchanged, the same one I'd worn for 20 years when I needed a room to understand that what was happening was not theater. Mr. Langford. My voice came out measured and clear, reaching the back wall without effort. The voice of a man who had spent 2 decades making certain he was heard in precisely this room. Before we proceed, this court is required to make a disclosure. I could feel the gallery lean forward. The court reporter's fingers hovered above the keys. The defense attorney in this matter, Mr. Preston Langford, is married to my daughter. This relationship was disclosed to the Dallas County Judicial Ethics Committee prior to today's proceedings. The committee has reviewed the matter and authorized this court to proceed on the condition that both parties are informed on the record and given explicit opportunity to object. I looked at Preston directly. He had not moved since rising to his feet. His hands were at his sides, and from 10 feet away, I could see they were not entirely steady. Does the defense wish to object to this court's jurisdiction? Every person in that room turned toward Preston Langford. I watched him calculate, watched the options move through his eyes, the same eyes that had looked at my tan overcoat on the courthouse steps 40 minutes ago, with such complete and comfortable contempt. If he objected, he would have to say, why would have to stand in front of those journalists in the gallery and give an account of what had happened on those steps? The shoulder, the coffee, careful old man. All of it entering the record in a room full of people holding notebooks. His jaw worked. His knuckles, where his hands had found the table edge again, went white. He shook his head, once. Short and sharp, like a man severing his own options before he could reconsider them. I picked up the gavel. The handle was smooth and familiar in my palm. The same gavel, the same bench, the same courtroom, where I had delivered 2,000 verdicts and never once lost track of what I was there to do. The gavel came down. Then 2 words quiet as a verdict and just as final. Be seated. Here is what Preston expected when he lowered himself back into that chair retribution. I could see it in the way he held himself. After those 2 words landed, the tension locked across his shoulders, the jaw set like a man steeling himself for the blow. The eyes that kept drifting between me and the door, running the numbers on his options. He was bracing for a judge who had come to settle a score. Rulings piled against him from the first argument. A courtroom that felt less like a proceeding and more like a mechanism closing around him. What he got instead was the one thing he had no practice handling. Fairness, counsel, I said, turning to the plaintiff's table. You may proceed with opening statements. Loretta Drexel rose from the plaintiff's table, mid-40s, dark suit. The kind of composure that accumulates after 15 years in courtrooms, where composure is the only currency that holds its value. She was Renee Dillard's attorney among the better plaintiffs' lawyers in Dallas County, and the case file she had assembled made plain exactly how seriously she was treating this. Her opening statement ran 11 minutes, clean, precise, no ornamentation. She laid out the facts of that Friday night on Lemon Avenue: the blood alcohol level, the speed, the red light, the collision. Kevin Dillard dead at 34 years old. His daughter 6 years old, airlifted to Children's Medical Center Dallas with a fractured pelvis. She did not editorialize. She did not reach for emotion. She let the facts do what facts do when they are that unambiguous. Then Preston rose. He straightened his jacket, rolled his neck, once the reset of an athlete entering competition, and delivered an opening statement that I had to acknowledge in a professional capacity was technically accomplished. He built his argument methodically, reasonable doubt, conflicting forensic timelines, the unreliability of field sobriety testing under specific conditions. He cited 3 Texas appellate cases by citation number without once consulting his notes. He was good. I had never questioned that he was good. 40 minutes into the morning, Loretta Drexel asked her first witness a question that pointed somewhere Preston didn't want the room going. Objection. He was on his feet before she'd finished the sentence. Leading the witness, Your Honor. I examined the question. He was right. Sustained, I said. A beat. Preston's chin came up slightly. Not by much, enough to register. He sat back down. 20 minutes after that, Loretta Drexel moved to introduce testimony through a witness who had not been properly designated as an expert under Texas Rule of Evidence 702. Objection, Preston said. Witness lacks the qualifications to offer this opinion under Rule 702. I checked the witness's credentials in the file. Preston was right again? Sustained, I said. Counsel will need to secure a proper expert designation before this testimony can come in. This time, Preston didn't sit down immediately. He held his position for half a beat longer than required, just enough for his assistant to register it, just enough for it to mean something. By the lunch recess, I had sustained 4 of Preston's objections and overruled 2, a standard morning for a hard-fought civil case. Nothing a reviewing court would blink at. But Preston didn't see standard. Preston saw what he chose to see. I watched him in the corridor during the break, not directly through the glass panel beside the chamber door. He was talking to his assistant with the body language of a man whose guard was coming down, shoulders easing the jaw, releasing its grip. The taut posture of the morning giving way to something more familiar, more settled, the Preston Langford, who had planted himself on the courthouse steps this morning and told a retired old man to go home. I caught fragments through the glass, straight down the middle. Evidence is on our side. And then with the particular confidence of a man who has already composed his victory speech exactly where I want to be. His assistant said something I couldn't catch. Preston shook his head and smiled. The real smile, the one I'd first seen at Thanksgiving 6 years ago. The one that never made it as far as his eyes. I turned from the glass. Behind me on the desk sat the case file. 40 pages of motions, depositions, forensic reports, witness lists. I'd been through it 3 times in the past week. Every argument Preston planned to make, I could see coming, and I knew precisely where each one would take him. I picked up my pen and put a small notation in the margin of page 37. The afternoon session moved much the same as the morning. Preston's objections were sharp, well-timed, frequently correct. I ruled accordingly. By 4:00, when I brought the day to a close, Preston Langford walked out of that courtroom with the stride of a man who had already decided the contest was over. Renee Dillard followed behind him. Her attorney put a hand on her arm and said something close to her ear. Renee nodded one short, tight motion and pressed her lips together so hard the color drained from them. She was holding herself the way people do when the alternative is coming undone in front of strangers. As she passed the bench, she glanced up and for a moment her eyes found mine. I gave her nothing, no reassurance, no apology, no hint of what I knew that she didn't yet. A judge's face is a mirror, not a window. I had understood that in my first year on the bench, and nothing in 20 years had dislodged it, but I held her gaze for exactly 1 second longer than I needed to. He read my fairness as weakness. He had made that error before, with me, with Claire, with every person he had ever underestimated. I had no intention of setting him straight, not yet. The second day of trial is where cases quietly fracture. Not in the moments people remember, but in the slow, unglamorous procedural work that nobody notices until it has already run its course. Preston understood that. He walked into courtroom 7 on day 2 with the energy of a man who had slept well, which told me everything I needed to know about where his head was. I had not slept at all. I'd been at my kitchen table until 2:00 in the morning, working through Loretta Drexel's evidence list, line by line, not because I had doubts about her case, but because I needed to know exactly what was coming before it got there. Somewhere around midnight on page 14 of her exhibit log, I found it. Exhibit 11C, a set of toxicology and accident reconstruction reports assembled by the Dallas Police Department in the 72 hours after the collision. Critical material, the kind that, presented correctly, narrates the events of that night on Lemon Avenue with the exactness of a timestamp. But the authentication log attached to 11C had a problem. The chain of custody form, the document that traces every hand a piece of evidence passes through from collection to courtroom, required, under Texas Rules of Evidence Rule 901, was missing a signature. The DPD evidence technician who moved the reports from the lab to the DA's office had initialed the form, but left the certification block unsigned. A small omission, the kind that happens late at night when someone is exhausted and assumes the initial will do. It wasn't enough. Under Rule 901, authenticating documentary evidence requires a complete, unbroken chain of custody. A missing certification signature breaks that chain. The evidence cannot come in. I stared at that missing signature for a long time. Then I closed the file, went to bed, and lay in the dark thinking about Kevin Dillard and what it takes for a man to run a red light at 60 amps a pole. Morning came. The courtroom filled. Loretta Drexel moved through her morning witnesses with the confidence of someone who didn't yet know what was waiting. She was precise, controlled, steering each witness exactly where she needed them. The gallery grew quieter as the morning progressed, the attentiveness that settles over a room when people begin to understand that something real is at stake. At 10:45, she moved to admit Exhibit 11C. The plaintiff offers Exhibit 11C into evidence, Your Honor, DPD toxicology and accident reconstruction reports. Preston was standing before she finished. Objection. Your Honor, chain of custody. The authentication log for Exhibit 11C is missing the certification signature on the evidence transfer form. The chain is broken under Rule 901. Every head in the room turned toward me. I opened the exhibit, examined the authentication log, looked at the initials where the signature line sat empty. The technician had written his initials DR in the certification block, but initials are not a signature. Rule 901 does not treat them as equivalent. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has upheld that distinction in no fewer than 7 published opinions since 1997. My role in that moment was not to want an outcome. My role was to apply the law. Objection sustained. Exhibit 11C is excluded pending proper authentication. Counsel, you have 24 hours to cure the deficiency. The sound from the gallery was not large. A single collective breath, sharp, compressed. 50 people adjusting their understanding at the same moment. Loretta Drexel's composure held, but only just. A muscle in her jaw moved. She gave a single controlled nod. Understood, Your Honor. I let my gaze move briefly to the plaintiff's side of the gallery. Renee Dillard had both palms pressed flat against her thighs. Her knuckles had gone the color of old bone. Her attorney leaned in and said something quiet. Renee shook her head once, small, rigid, and fixed her eyes on the middle distance with the expression of a woman absorbing damage and refusing to let anyone see how much. Something tightened in my chest in a way I kept off my face. Across the room, Preston had settled back into his chair. He wasn't celebrating. Too careful for that, too conscious of how it would read. But something had shifted in how he occupied that space. Yesterday's wound-up vigilance was gone. In its place was ease, a quiet settledness, the posture of a man who has watched the balance tip his way and is content to let it finish moving. He said something to his assistant. The assistant wrote it down. During the afternoon recess, I was at my desk when Beverly knocked and stepped in. The hallway, she said, and I understood what she meant. I moved to the chamber door and listened. Preston's voice carrying without effort from the corridor. The evidence problem reshapes their timeline. Without 11C in front of the jury in sequence, their case loses cohesion. We press hard tomorrow morning, and by afternoon, a pause. Tell me I'm wrong, his assistant's voice quieter. You're not wrong, Preston. Again, the certainty of a man who believes he has already written the ending. He's being straight with me. The judge is being straight with me. I was worried for nothing. I closed the chamber door. I sat at my desk, lifted my pen, set it down. In 24 hours, Loretta Drexel would cure the authentication deficiency and Exhibit 11C would come back into evidence. That was procedural routine if time pressured. But the thing arriving in 24 hours that actually mattered wasn't that. I looked at my phone. One unread message received that afternoon at 2:17 p.m. from a number I didn't recognize. I'd read it twice already. Judge Harding, I need to speak with you through proper channels about a witness. Please have your clerk contact me. L. Drexel. I set the phone face down on the desk. Preston went home that night certain the next morning was his. He had no idea what was already moving toward those courthouse doors. She didn't call ahead. She didn't ask for my blessing, my permission, or my guidance. That's how she operated at 7 years old. Mind already made up, no discussion required, and apparently nothing had changed. Preston found out the same moment I did. Loretta Drexel rose at 9:02 on day 3's opening and announced, "Your Honor, the plaintiff moves to add one supplemental witness." The clerk had received the motion and its supporting paperwork at 7:48 that morning. Texas Rules of Civil Procedure, Rule 193.6 permits a late witness addition past the discovery deadline when the moving party can show that witness carries material information that no reasonable preparation could have surfaced earlier. Loretta had gotten that filing in before the building's lights were fully on, affidavit attached spelling out exactly why this witness met the threshold. Preston was standing before she'd drawn her next breath. "Objection, Your Honor. We passed the witness disclosure cutoff 2 weeks ago. This is an 11th-hour procedural ambush calculated to Mr. Langford." I kept my voice flat. "The motion and the affidavit are before me, and I've read both carefully. This witness possesses direct first-hand knowledge of conduct squarely at issue in this proceeding, knowledge the plaintiff could not have reached through ordinary discovery. The motion is granted." The muscle along Preston's jaw pulled tight. "Your Honor, the defense has been given no time to—" "You will have full opportunity to cross-examine," I told him. "Counsel, call your witness." Loretta Drexel pivoted toward the rear doors and in a voice she'd ironed deliberately flat said, "The plaintiff calls Claire Langford." The doors swung open. My daughter came into the room. Under the bench where no one could see, I pressed both palms hard against my thighs and held them there. I breathed through it, the practiced discipline of a man who has trained himself to stay contained when something arrives too fast and too heavy for the judicial composure to catch cleanly. Gray blouse, dark slacks. Plain quiet, nothing reaching for attention. Dark hair drawn back. Every step she took was measured the stride of someone who has fully weighed the price of what they're about to do and made peace with paying it. Preston got nothing, not a glance. Neither did I. Her eyes tracked only Loretta Drexel as she moved toward the stand as though the rest of the courtroom had ceased to exist. I turned my attention to Preston instead. The color left his face the way a light goes out, not fading, not dimming, but simply gone all at once. His mouth had sealed into a hard, expressionless line. 2 days' worth of careful layered notes covered the legal pad in front of him. I watched his hand travel toward it and then hover, fingers suspended just above the surface, touching nothing. His assistant pressed close and murmured something sharp into his ear. Preston gave no sign of hearing it. His eyes hadn't left his wife. Claire took the witness chair, sat straight, and laid both hands in her lap. From my position, 10 feet above her, I could make out the tight interlacing of her fingers, one thumb grinding into the opposite palm, the barely visible self-anchoring of a person carrying more fear than their face is willing to admit. Yet, when Loretta Drexel opened her questioning, Claire's voice didn't tremble. "Miss Langford, would you describe your relationship to the defendant? Preston Langford is my husband," Claire said. Then a pause that carried roughly 6 years of weight inside it. "We are currently separated." Something passed through the gallery, an audible shift from somewhere in the back row. "Ms. Langford, in the 2 weeks leading up to this trial, did you come across something on your husband's personal laptop?" "I did." Claire's chin rose a fraction. "I needed to print a school document and borrowed his computer. I work as a substitute teacher. An email thread was sitting open on the screen when I sat down." "Can you tell us what that thread contained?" "The exchange was between my husband and a private investigator." Claire's voice held, but the knit of her fingers drew tighter. "He had instructed the investigator to dig up damaging material on Kevin Dillard, the man killed in the accident. The investigator came back and said, 'Mr. Dillard's record was clean.' My husband's reply," she paused, pulled one breath in. He wrote, and I'm giving this from memory. Then we create context. People believe what they read. Make it sound credible. Every sound in the gallery stopped. My eyes went to Renee Dillard front row, both hands locked around her armrests, her mouth compressed until the color drained from it. She was watching Claire with an expression that lived somewhere between shock and something harder to name. What crosses a woman's face when she learns out loud in front of everyone that the effort to frame her dead husband had been mapped out and funded in advance. Your witness, Loretta said, and took her seat. Preston pushed back his chair and walked to the podium. He squared the legal pad. He looked across 12 feet of floor at his wife, and something moved through his eyes that caught me off guard. Not fury, not the cool calculation I'd watched him deploy for 2 days. Something rawer than that. The stunned, undefended look of a man who had spent 6 years scripting, who Claire Langford was permitted to be and had just been shown in the worst possible venue, how badly he'd misjudged it. His mouth opened, shut, opened again. Preston rose to question his own wife, and I knew the briefcase held whatever he believed would pull her apart. What he hadn't accounted for was what she'd brought through that door with her. He worked her for 38 minutes. Methodical, that much I'll acknowledge. 3 separate lines of attack, her standing as a credible witness, her reasons for coming forward, and the conditions under which the email had supposedly appeared. Disciplined, contained, never once lifting his voice, and in a courtroom that kind of cold control lands harder than volume. Isn't it the case, he said, pitching slightly forward over the podium, that we are actively engaged in a separation proceeding right now, and that you have a concrete personal stake in seeing my professional standing damaged? Claire met his gaze without moving. I have a personal stake in telling the truth. That's a different thing entirely. You're saying you read this email 2 weeks ago. Did you preserve any record of it? At the time, I printed the thread, Claire said. I still have it. But you didn't go to the police. You didn't contact your own lawyer. You carried this to opposing counsel in a case where your estranged husband is sitting at the defense table. I took it to the people positioned to act on it, Claire said. Yes. Preston's jaw moved, one quick clench reined in immediately. Miss Langford, could it be that what appeared on that screen was a working draft, a hypothetical strategy note, the kind of exploratory litigation language any defense attorney might generate while sizing up a case? Claire's eyes stayed fixed on his. He wrote, "Make it sound credible." That is not a hypothetical. That is a directive. The room shifted with that low cumulative adjustment, a gallery full of people following every thread, finding themselves unable to look elsewhere. Preston burned through another 20 minutes, rearranging the same 3 questions in different orders. Claire met each one with the same spare, unembellished accuracy, a woman who had prepared nothing because she didn't need to. She simply knew what she'd seen. When he finally said no further questions and lowered himself into his chair, the atmosphere in the room had altered, like a table that's been rocking on a short leg for hours and has at last settled into the tilt it can't recover from. Loretta Drexel stood for redirect. Ms. Langford, did you arrive here today carrying anything beyond your testimony? Claire's hand went into the bag at her feet. It was steady. Steadier, honestly, than I'd expected. Steadier than it had any business being, considering what she was doing and who sat 12 feet away watching every movement. She placed a small object on the rail of the witness stand. A USB drive, standard size, black casing, no markings. What I have here, Claire said, is a copy of the dash cam footage recorded by Conrad Whitley's vehicle the night of the accident on Lemon Avenue. It was given to me by a woman named Gail Cornett. Miss Cornett held a written service authorization from Mr. Whitley. She was the person he hired to clean and service his personal vehicles. Under that authorization, she had routine documented access to the vehicle's interior, including its onboard equipment. Following the accident, she witnessed Mr. Whitley and certain associates interacting with the vehicle's dash cam system in a manner she found troubling. Prior to the car being taken in for what Mr. Whitley described as a technical inspection, and in the course of her normal contracted duties, Ms. Cornett connected a personal device to the dash cam port and copied what was stored there. The gallery broke not into noise exactly, but into that particular charged energy that fills a room when a large number of people arrive at the same understanding in the same instant. Beverly's gavel struck once clean and sharp. The room settled back into itself. Preston was already on his feet. Objection chain of custody, Your Honor. Authentication. This device never came through proper discovery channels. There's no way to verify. Your Honor, Loretta was already moving before he finished. The plaintiff is simultaneously submitting a sworn affidavit from Gail Cornett, laying out the precise method and timestamp of the data copy, along with a signed certification Ms. Cornett completed at the moment of the copy, not reconstructed afterward. We're also submitting a certification from an independent digital forensics examiner confirming the footage is unaltered and consistent with the dash cam system's native format, and records showing Ms. Cornett first contacted plaintiff's counsel 48 hours ago after seeing news coverage of this trial. Unlike Exhibit 11C, every link in this chain is fully executed and dated. She set a folder on the clerk's desk. Chain of custody complete. Authentication documented under Texas Rules of Evidence, Rule 901, subsection B9, a process or system shown to produce accurate results. Beverly handed me the folder. I read it through every page. The affidavit was clean. The forensic certification was thorough. The timestamp on the copied footage matched the night of the accident down to the second. Under Rule 901, this cleared the bar. The court accepts the evidence I said. We'll take a 30-minute recess before viewing the footage. The gavel came down. In those 30 minutes, the courtroom emptied into the hallway in clusters, journalists calling editors, lawyers conferring in tight, urgent voices. Gallery members gathered in small knots with the wide-eyed alertness of people who sense they are living through something they'll be recounting for years. Preston didn't go anywhere. He sat at the defense table with both hands flat on the surface, eyes fixed on the USB drive resting in the court clerk's evidence tray. I went to my chambers. Beverly followed me in and set the drive on my desk. "Are you ready?" she asked. I looked at the drive. Thought about Lemon Avenue on a Friday night. Thought about Kevin Dillard. Thought about a 6-year-old girl in a helicopter over Dallas. "I've been ready for 40 years, I said. Beverly picked up. The drive walked to the door and stopped. "Gerald," her voice had dropped a register. "Whatever's on here, it's going to change everything in that room." "I know," I said. She nodded once and went back out. I sat at my desk through the quiet of those 30 minutes and thought about the footage that was about to play on a screen in the courtroom 7. 37 minutes of recording. From the forensics report, I already knew what the first 5 minutes held. The accident, the red light, the collision, a man dying on Lemon Avenue. It was the 6th minute I hadn't been able to put down since reading that report at midnight. In 20 minutes, no one else in that room would be able to either. 37 minutes of footage. The first 5 told the story of a man who died. The 6th told the story of the man who decided what that death was going to be worth. The screen was large. The courtroom's presentation display lowered from the ceiling for the occasion, filling the wall behind the witness stand. Every seat in that room had a clear line to it. The court reporter's hands hovered above the keys. The gallery had gone the kind of quiet that has physical weight to it. I nodded to Beverly. She started the footage. The opening minutes were exactly what the forensics report had described. Lemon Avenue on a Friday night. The dash cam's wide-angle lens trained on the lane ahead. Traffic signals, ordinary city movement, the unremarkable rhythm of an evening in motion. Then the speed climbing, the red light, the impact sudden and total, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but simply happens. Renee Dillard made one sound, small, involuntary, as if something had hit her from inside her own chest. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm, and Renee pressed her fist against her mouth and held it there, her shoulders moving once, twice, then locking rigid as she forced herself to keep her eyes on the screen. I kept mine there too. My hands lay flat on the bench, motionless. Minute 4. The vehicle had come to a stop, engine still running. Through the dash cam's interior microphone standard on the Escalade's integrated system, confirmed in the forensics report, we could hear Conrad Whitley breathing fast and ragged, the breathing of a man whose body has processed the situation before his mind has caught up. Minute 5, Whitley's voice low and broken, "Oh God, oh God." Then his phone connected through the Bluetooth system. The dash cam's interior microphone picked up both sides of the call with the flat digital clarity of a recording that has no interest in mercy. 1 ring, 2. And then Preston's voice filled. Courtroom 7. Calm, immediate. Not the voice of a man pulled from sleep, the voice of a man who had been waiting. "Listen to me carefully. Do not get out of the vehicle. Do not hand your phone to anyone. Do not consent to any transfer of data from this vehicle's systems. When the police arrive, you say 2 things. Only you need medical attention, and you need your attorney present before any questioning. Do you understand me? Whitley's voice cracking. Preston, there's a man. I think he's not moving. I think he's... Preston, harder now. A blade edge running just beneath the calm, eyes forward. Do exactly what I said. I'm on my way. The call ended. The footage continued. Through the windshield, the first emergency lights were visible in the distance, red and blue coming from the east, still 2 minutes out. Whitley sat in his Escalade, didn't get out, didn't call. 911, didn't move toward the man lying on Lemon Avenue. He sat there and waited for his lawyer. The room didn't explode. It didn't erupt into noise. What happened was quieter than that, and worse. A collective exhale, 50 people releasing something they'd been holding, followed by a stillness so absolute I could make out the ventilation system humming overhead. I let the footage run to its end, all 37 minutes. I owed that to Kevin Dillard. I owed that to Renee. When it finished, Beverly stopped the display. The white screen glowed empty. Preston hadn't moved. He was sitting with both hands on the table, and his face had gone past pale into something with no color left in it at all. The expression of a man watching the architecture of everything he'd constructed come apart at the foundation too fast, too slow and too complete to salvage anything from. I leaned forward, the court notes. I said, my voice reaching every corner of that room, that the footage raises significant questions regarding potential obstruction of justice and conduct unbecoming an officer of the court under the Texas disciplinary rules of professional conduct. These matters will be referred to the State Bar of Texas and the Dallas County District Attorney's Office for separate review. I looked toward the jury box. The jury will now deliberate on the question of Conrad Whitley's liability. The gavel came down. Renee Dillard stood. Her legs weren't steady. Her attorney caught her by the elbow, and she gripped his forearm for one moment, just one, before she pulled herself upright. She pressed both palms flat against her thighs and looked at the screen that now glowed blank and white where her husband's death had just played, and something moved through her face. Not relief, not victory. The slow, exhausted arrival of being believed. The jury was out for 3 hours and 14 minutes. I sat in my chambers and left the phone untouched. What came next belonged to 12 people I had never met, and to a reckoning 40 years in the making. 3 hours and 14 minutes. Beverly knocked at 2:17. They're back, she said. The foreperson, a woman in her 50s, reading glasses pushed up into her hair, rose and delivered the verdict in 4 words. We find for the plaintiff. Renee Dillard sat completely still for one breath. Then she reached into her purse and retrieved the photograph she had put away before proceedings began. Her husband caught mid-smile, looking at whoever held the camera. She pressed it against her chest, her shoulders curved forward, and she wept, the way you weep when something that has been wrong for a very long time has finally irreversibly been set right, quietly, completely, without a trace of performance left in her. I read the formal judgment into the record, referred Preston's conduct to the state. Bar of Texas transferred the obstruction questions to the DA's office, removed my robe, and hung it on the hook in my chambers for the last time. I was halfway down the main corridor when he caught up to me. You planned this? Preston's voice was raw, every layer of polish scraped off it. All of it. I stopped and turned. He looked like a man who'd been disassembled. Jacket open tie, loose face, carrying the wreckage of someone who had structured their entire life around never losing. I ruled correctly, I said. Every objection you won because the law was on your side. That's what fair looks like. You just never learned to recognize it because you spent so long finding ways around it. You destroyed me. That last word came out fractured. My career. Everything. I kept my voice flat. Those were your choices, every one of them. All I did was make sure the right people were there to see them. His jaw tightened, something desperate behind his eyes. Say more. Argue back. You can't just turn around and leave. I took one last look at him, the same man who had planted himself on those courthouse steps the morning and told a retired old man to go home. The courtroom weighed your conduct, I said. Life will judge who you chose to be. Then I turned and walked. Claire was at the corridor's end, Nora beside her, fingers tucked inside her mother's hand. Claire closed the distance in 2 steps, and then the rest, all at once, arms around me, nothing said. I felt the exhale leave her long, trembling, finally free against my shoulder. Dad. That was enough. Just the one word. Then something small found my hand. Nora looked up at me with her mother's eyes and offered the only words remaining. Grandpa, let's go home. The three of us stepped out through the courthouse doors into the October afternoon, Nora between us, her right hand in mine, her left in Claire's. Claire signed the divorce papers in November. Christmas Eve, she and Nora came to the house. Pot roast, with thyme, the way my wife Evelyn used to make it every Sunday. Nora giving me the full biography of a dog named Biscuit she'd invented entirely in her head. Claire laughing genuinely for the first time in years. I set a card next to Evelyn's photograph on the mantel. Claire's handwriting to the greatest judge of my life. Love, Claire and Nora. She's home, honey, I said. They're both home. That October afternoon, walking out of those courthouse doors with Claire on one side and Nora on the other, that was the moment I understood what the years had actually been for. It cost more than I expected. Not the legal work, not the maneuvering, not even the weight of sitting on that bench knowing my daughter was in the room. What it cost was the time. The years I spent thinking she had pulled away, when the truth was she had been kept away. I believe God doesn't waste that kind of pain. He holds it until the right use for it arrives. And sometimes the right use arrives in a courtroom, in the last chapter of a career you thought was already finished. For anyone who finds these grandpa revenge stories, or these father stories of quiet endurance and love, here is what I would tell you from the far side of it. Do not confuse someone's silence with indifference. People go quiet for reasons they are not yet free to speak. If someone works harder to keep you away from a person you love than to explain why, pay attention to that. The effort itself is the answer. Patience is not weakness. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait until the moment is yours and then not waste it. And when the door finally opens, walk through it without looking back. The person waiting on the other side has already been waiting long enough. If this story reached something in, you leave a comment below and tell me what it brought up. And if you know someone who is quietly holding on through something hard, share this with them. They may need to hear that it does not always end the way the powerful people planned. Subscribe to Grandpa's Revenge and stay with me. There are more stories where this one came from. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I'll see you in the next one.